Google answers if you want to. Like, I don't care as long as I'm getting answers. That's like really awesome. The last class was not very good at that. And the other thing is you'll need to have your computer out. I see most of you have them. If you don't have your computer, that's fine. You can use your phone. You can just take that out right now. And then the first question I have for you guys is like show of hands, or you can, show of hands. Who has like PCs here? I'm just curious to see. Okay, you don't have a PC. Okay, what do you have? A Mac. Do you also have a Mac?
Mac, yeah.
Okay.
That's not a Mac.
Well, yeah. As someone really smart in the back room pointed out, there seems to be a problem with the definition of PC. A lot of you seem to think it just means window machine, but PC is actually a personal computer, a multi-purpose computer whose size, capabilities, and price make it feasible for individual use. So ranges from Macs, what you traditionally call PCs or Windows machines, as you should refer to them as, Linux computers, your smartphones, your tablets, TI-84 calculators. These are all personal computers. So today I'm going to dive into the traditional idea of a personal computer, mainly the desktop computer that you have at home, but it can also apply to all the laptop computers and smartphones if you really get into the inside. They're all fundamentally the same. We're going to start with what long-term storage is. In laptops and desktops, there's two main ways of having long-term storage. That's a hard disk drive or a solid-state drive. The hard disk drive is shown right there with spinning disks in it, kind of like a CD player. And the solid-state drives has chips that don't move. They just move electrons within them to store data. You can think of a long-term storage as like in a kitchen where this hot man is cooking. He has a refrigerator and pantry in the back of his kitchen where he stores recipes for future, stores ingredients for future recipes that he's going to execute. And so you can kind of think of that refrigerator, the pantry in the back of his kitchen as your hard drive, your long-term storage for your computer. After that, we get to the short-term storage, or as we call in the computer world, random access memory, or RAM. You can't actually download more RAM. You may have heard someone, maybe you got trolled by this, but it's a physical component in your computer, and compared to the hard drive, which is like the pantry in the back of your kitchen, the random access memory is like the counter space in Gordon Ramsay's kitchen, where for the recipe he's cooking right now, he needed to get these ingredients out, and he put it onto his workbench. And so from that workbench, the actual chef himself, the CPU, Gordon Ramsay, is cooking the meal. And so that's where the computer analogously has a central processing unit. And that's going to do all the calculations, that's doing all the programs that you're running, and the operating system that you're powering on. When you see CPUs, there tend to be two numbers associated with them, cores and clock speeds. Clock speeds is very straightforward. It's how many calculations you can do per second. Per second is what you measure in hertz. 1 hertz is 1 thing per second, 1 cycle per second. And so these CPUs tend to go up to the billions of hertz, so gigahertz. And the more is almost always better. The more gigahertz, the faster your programs are running, the happier you are about using your computer because it's not lagging, you're not getting frustrated with that. Cores, on the other hand, is a little more complicated. More cores doesn't necessarily mean faster computer. It's not one-to-one. Cores can be thought of as kind of having multiple CPUs in your computer, or like having multiple chefs in a kitchen. The thing with multiple chefs in the kitchen is that you can divide the work, and you guys can all, like, he cuts the vegetables, you're cooking the noodles in the pot, and then together you get one dish that comes out, and it's a lot faster than one person having to do it. And so you'll see this in upscale restaurants. The restaurant will have like many cooks that all produce tons of meals, getting very fast out of the kitchen, way faster than what you can do at home. The problem with that is you need to have the cores working together. How many of you have seen MasterChef? A show of hands? Nice. Okay, MasterChef, there's a stage where they break into groups, and then they have to work together to try to produce, basically run a restaurant on their own for a little bit of time. And what's really entertaining about it is the chefs almost never work together. They don't know how to coordinate tasks together. They're not happy with how someone's work ethic is, and it's a total mess. And so in the computing world, with many cores, it's the same thing. If you have too many cores and the computer doesn't know how to handle all these different cores in your computer, then it becomes very messy and it won't actually run the program. So programs are written for a certain amount of chefs. For example, like Google Chrome is optimized for 2 or 4 cores that you can run, but if you have an 8-core computer, it's not going to really make Chrome any faster. It's like shoving more chefs into a restaurant that has only been operating with 4 chefs ever. They don't know how to use more people. It's going to become very hectic like this. So I actually forgot a little step in my presentation for the candy, because I remember I promised you guys candy. We're going to head back to the hard drive. I'm curious if you guys know any hard drive manufacturers. Yes? Seagate. That's right. Very big in the hard drive. Nice catch. That's true. Anybody else?
Samsung?
Samsung, that's right. Very big in SSDs. There's actually one on the screen right there. Is Samsung? Yep.
Does Intel count as one?
Oh, Intel does count as one. Nice. Okay, you guys can Google answer if it's on the screen, but for RAM, do you guys know any RAM manufacturers?
Dell.
Dell? Okay, that's actually correct. Dell does make RAM. They just usually don't sell consumer RAM. Right. They're not a traditional seller that you go to Amazon.com and buy Dell RAM. Any other answers? This is where you guys can Google answers. You literally just have to type in RAM manufacturers and you get like
It's RAM, this car company.
Corsair, that's right. You good? Okay. And then onto the CPU. There might be a logo on the screen, I don't know. You guys know any central processing unit manufacturers?
AMD.
AMD, that's right. Any other ones?
IBM.
IBM. Ooh, maybe we can Google that. I actually haven't ever seen someone buying an IBM processor.
I just Googled it.
Nice. Okay, that's great. IBM's died in a lot of things recently. Sorry, no candy reading. Okay, back to the kitchen. We talked about how the chef is basically that computer that's executing commands. Gordon Ramsay can cook and cut stuff way faster than I can. He has a higher clock speed, you could say. Now, if you notice in the kitchen, he kind of has a cutting board right in front of him. We have the desk space, which we call the RAM, his work counter, where he has the ingredients for his current meal. But then, what he's currently working on, he has another cutting board where he has a sort of smaller RAM. And this is actually inside the CPU. We call it a cache. It's like the smaller RAM for the exact task that you're working on right now. And so after he finishes the meal, he has to present it really nicely so it can go out to the restaurant floor and someone can consume it. This process of basically packaging a program from those ones and zeros that went through a compute unit to looking like something coherent on the screen is done by the graphics card. Any graphics card manufacturers you guys know? Or know from Googling it? Is that you? Who is that? You don't want to pay me. No.
Doesn't AMD also make graphic cards?
AMD also make graphics card. You want more candy?
I will, because I gave it to Ben.
Okay. Well, Ben's a candy. Anybody else? Sorry?
AMD.
EMD?
AMD.
AMD. Did you just say it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just said that.
Okay, so graphics cards are what takes this from the CPU, takes all those ones and zeros and makes it into an actual thing that you can see on your screen. They're also very good at parallel processing for doing physics equations, so when you're playing a 3D game, it actually appears as something coherent on your screen. The two numbers you're going to see when you're doing graphics cards are memory and clock speeds. Memory is like the random access memory for your CPU, also the counter space, but specifically for the GPU. he's going to have his own RAM to do his own processes, almost like his own mini computer. There's also clock speeds, just like the CPU. The more clock speeds, the faster he's going to be rendering images for your monitor. Last two components in the computer is the motherboard. Motherboard connects everything together. So you'll see on here is an example of a motherboard, the sockets for everything. There's a CPU, there's RAM slots, there's PCI lanes to plug in your graphics card, there's SATA outputs to plug into your hard drive, and then there's even I/O to go to your flash drives and Ethernet. Do you guys know any motherboard manufacturers? Who was that? Okay, nice. That is the manufacturer, yes. Yeah, BioStar, that's right. And then power supplies. Just as the name indicates, the power supply unit supplies power to all the components inside a computer. And then, do you guys know any power supply manufacturers?
Cooler Master.
Cooler Master, yeah. Yeah,
Seasonic?
I believe that's correct. There's also one on the screen. Yeah.
Corsair.
Yeah. I don't know what it says. Okay, here's a computer with all the parts in it, and we'll just go over real quickly what they all did. We have the hard drives right here with the spinning discs in them. You can kind of see a circular cutout on the top of them. That's where the long-term storage is. And they plug into the motherboard using SATA connections right here. From there, their memory will be loaded onto the RAM, the random access memory, which is the working space for the computer. And from there, they're plugged into the motherboard in these slots. And it's very close to the CPU. The CPU and RAM are always working together. The CPU will do a task and then set it back aside on the RAM, take another task, perform that, put it back onto the RAM. So they're very close together. Here's the CPU covered by this housing, which is actually a cooler. The CPU gets really hot the faster you run it, just like when you're running on the track and field and you're running after your 100 meter, your body gets really hot, you're sweating, and well, at least I am. And then you need to cool down. That's also plugged into the motherboard, which connects everything. In the motherboard, we have a graphics card here, plugged into a PCIe lane, and this is also where you plug your monitor into when you want to take advantage of the graphics card presenting stuff on the screen. There's actually two places to plug in your monitor on a computer. There would be the graphics card, and then on the motherboard, the side, there's places where you can actually plug in your HDMI or VGA. Now you have to be careful when choosing which one to plug into, because the one coming out of your graphics card goes through the graphics card, which means there's been image processing on it. If you plug into the motherboard, it doesn't know that there's a graphics card attached. So all the processing will actually be done by your CPU, which means you're loading it with the normal compute processes and also making it do graphics processing. I don't have a writing device here, but the CPU, all CPUs actually have a very tiny, low-powered GPU on them in the case that you don't have a graphics card built into your computer. So that way they can always output something to your screen, but they tend to be much weaker, and they also don't have their own dedicated RAM. They have to share these sticks of RAM with the CPU normal functions. Here's another personal computer. This one's an iPhone taken apart. Here we can see sort of a two-piece motherboard that probably connects together. And then connected to the motherboard, we have a CPU, GPU, we have long-term storage where there's RAM on there. And then the iPhone has a power supply unit, which is sort of like it's the battery that's sending power to all the devices. And then here we have a monitor and all the different sensors that go onto the phone. Okay, so another candy opportunity. Who knows what this graph is of? Yes.
Bitcoin.
That is Bitcoin, yes.
Yeah.
You can see the big boom that happened in early 2018, late 2017. And so what does Bitcoin have to do with anything here? Well, Bitcoin is actually something that you mine by doing calculations, and graphics cards which do parallel processing, which is great for video rendering and doing physics equations. Also is really good at processing blockchains and mining Bitcoin. So if you guys knew that Bitcoin was taking off during this time, you could infer that graphics cards would be in insanely high demand, and you could invest in those manufacturers that we talked about for the graphics card, because they would be very profitable during that time, and also maybe more stable than a Bitcoin investment. So knowing about computers can help you with stocks and business. Also, you can seem smart in front of your friends, telling them nice PC when they have a Mac, and they'll be like, what? And then you'll be like, it's a PC. And then you can also be smart when you're buying a computer so that you can get a really nice machine for your money. So I didn't go to college for computers. I learned everything from YouTube, because YouTube's very easy to just go watch videos. You sit them, you vegetate in front of the screen, and then 10 minutes later you know another piece of information. So this is a very popular YouTuber. Does anyone know who it is?
Linus Tech.
Yes, that is Linus Tech 6. So he's kind of like variety computer stuff. He'll review stuff from retro computers to all the modern graphics cards, and he'll go to tech shows across the country to show off what is happening in the tech world. This guy, he appeared in YouTube Rewind, the most disliked video of all time. He's done interviews with Elon Musk, and he plays Ultimate Frisbee. Does anyone recognize this person?
MKBHD.
MKBHD.
Oh,
Yes,
shoot.
almost.
Wait a minute.
Here, I'll still give you candy. Oh, I guess you got the candy. Yeah, so this guy will do phone reviews, and which is also a type of personal computer, and he's very big in the tech world. Okay, so now, since everyone has their computers or phones out, I want you to go to this URL.
Is that the right stuff? No,
And usually tiny URLs are dangerous because people could put whatever link they want behind it, including download links to viruses, but since you guys trust me,
yeah,
I put a very good link right here.
Is this a cheat sheet?
Yeah, so this is a cheat sheet of a whole bunch of computer technology jargon and stuff. And so this is for you guys to use afterwards if you want to review it. There's lots of useful information if you're ever buying a computer, and then I'm going to go through it with you right now. I'll give 1 more minute with the link there. Okay, so all the way back to the beginning of the lecture for long-term storage, we have the hard disk drive. 3 things you need to know about them. They're high capacity, they're pretty slow, and they're cheap. So being high capacity and cheap, that's what we want from them in the marketplace. That's why they're still being sold. The most bang for your buck in terms of capacity is going to come in at 2 terabytes, but you can find them all the way up to 14 terabytes. Now here for the speed, they come in basically 2 speeds, 5400 RPM and 7200 RPM. RPM means revolutions per minute, and that's all these like CDs within the hard drive. That's how fast they're turning. The faster they can turn, the more data you can access at a time, and so that's what will give them the different speeds. 5400 RPM will land you at about 100 megabytes per second, and 7200, 150 megabytes per second. Now, so I'm telling you these are the 2 speeds of a hard drive, but when you go onto Amazon or you're shopping for a hard drive, you're going to see a very different number. You're going to see 6 gigabits per second, and you're going to be like, Leo, 6 gigabits per second, I do the conversion, that's 750 megabytes per second. That's like way faster than these 2 speeds. What's going on? So, what the thing is this hard drive uses a SATA interface to plug into the computer. Just like your flash drive uses a USB interface to plug into your computer. The SATA 3 interface can actually have a bandwidth of up to 6 gigabits per second. But the thing is your hard drive is limited by the speed of rotation in it. So even though they're advertised to go at this speed, because SATA can handle that, they're actually only hitting 100 to 150 megabytes per second. The difference between a bit and a byte is one byte has 8 bits in it. So the conversion between 6 gigabits per second would be 1/8 of that in gigabytes per second. They're relatively cheap. As I said, a terabyte at 7200 RPM, you can probably find them for $50. 2 terabytes, $60. So the sweet spot's really at 2 terabytes. You can see the difference in price is very minuscule. So we can go to Amazon and look at hard disk drive. And so here we see some from Western Digital. That's another manufacturer. Seagate, I think one of you said that earlier. Let's look at this one here. So in the product name we see Western Digital. That's the name of the company. This is 2 terabytes. They're telling us SATA 6 gigabits per second, but you guys all know that's not 6 gigabits per second that you're actually going to experience in the real world. You're going to experience 100 to 150 megabytes per second, depending on the RPM. Down here we see 5400 RPM, so this is one of the slower ones, and that's at $62 for that. You can look up like a 6 terabyte one. This one, still 5400 RPM, will cost you $175. You can look at the Seagate one. This one's 7200 RPM, so we'll have faster speeds, and it's 4 terabytes, and that one's at $165. And you can see this one you could buy and see how much a 14 terabyte one costs. Oh, it's not even officially sold. Oh, look, one person sells it for $900. So you're losing bang for your buck, but servers who are housing tons and tons of hard drives might buy this just for the space efficiency. Okay, so the other type of long-term storage is the solid-state drive. The 3 things about this is it's lower capacity, it's faster, but it's also expensive. And so the most bang for your buck you're going to get in these is 128 to 256 gigabytes. 1 terabyte, which we talked about earlier, is 1,000 gigabytes. So you can see this is like an eighth of the quantity of a terabyte, or a 16th of that 2 terabyte sweet spot we were talking about earlier. These you can find up to 4 terabyte drives, but just like that 14 terabyte hard drive, the price curve is going to be pretty exponential as you get to the higher end of that. These are also very much faster, and they also use the SATA interface. And these ones will reach speeds of 550 megabytes per second compared to the hard drive, so that's like 5 times faster. And so this is why SSDs will also appear a lot faster to boot your computer and open programs. Now, this NVMe, which stands for, you can go to the bottom of the page to see random definitions. NVMe is non-volatile memory express. And what that is something that goes through the PCIe lanes. I mentioned PCIe when I was talking about hard drives. What that means is it's a lane that kind of skips all those logic gates in the motherboard, and it's connected almost directly to the CPU. So this means you're going to get much faster read speeds because it has a direct connection to the central processing unit. Here we can see we hit like 3,000 megabytes per second on that one. The problem with this is that they're expensive. You can see the price difference between SATA and NVMe is almost like double the price for every single tier. Some manufacturers of hard disk drives, which we talked about, were Seagate, Western Digital, Toshiba. SSD, Samsung's a big one, SanDisk, Western Digital are also very big. So we can look at some solid-state drives. Here's one by Samsung. Here's Crucial. See, this one is 500 gigabytes for about $60. And we see it says SATA, so that's going to be on the SATA interface, which is probably going to be like 500 megabytes per second. And we see here it says read-write is 560 and 510 megabytes per second. The Samsung one's a whole terabyte, and it's $150. Also on the SATA interface, see how much the 4 terabyte one costs. Okay, this one's almost $700, so you can see how much the price ramps up. And then here's NVMe SSDs. So you can see their price difference. Instead of saying SATA, they're going to say PCIe. And this one at 500 gigabytes is $130. This one, here's a terabyte one for $370. So the price ranges a lot for these, especially on the NVMe. It gets much more expensive. Okay, so back to short-term storage. We have random access memory, and there's in recent years there's 2 generations of random access memory. There's DDR3 and DDR4. The difference between them is one, the speeds that you can see between the two. These are measured in megahertz. You can see it's almost double from generation to generation. And the other difference is that they have different sockets. So if you buy DDR3 RAM and you try to stick it into your motherboard that supports DDR4 RAM, you physically can't jam it in unless you're just going to break it. In that case, you're not going to have any more working RAM. There's also the difference between desktop and laptop RAM. Desktop RAM usually comes in a different form factor. They're very long and skinny, and the laptop RAM tends to be smaller rectangles. And the manufacturers of RAM are Corsair, Kingston, G.Skill, and Crucial. Okay, so for RAM, we see one here from Corsair. You can see it's generation 4, DDR4, and 16 gigabytes in 2 8 gigabyte sticks. And these are rated at 3000 megahertz. Go here, we also see this is also 16 gigabytes. It's also 2 sticks of 8 gigabytes, and this is much cheaper. It's $85 compared to $120. But you'll see that this is DDR3, so it might not fit into a modern motherboard, and also the clock speed is way slower. This is 1600 compared to the 3000 we saw over there. Okay, now the central processing unit. We talked earlier about how cores more does not equal better, and it's dependent on how the programs are written to be optimized for different core counts. For your computers that are running back in Windows, the most bang for your buck you're going to get is at 4 cores. This is because the standard for writing programs has become 2 cores, and then some of the other really popular programs will also be written for 4 cores. There's like Microsoft Word, Google Chrome, stuff like that. When you're shopping for CPUs, you might see this term hyper-threading or multi-threaded processes. And what this is it'll take one core and it'll kind of alternate between the clocks of it to simulate having 2 cores out of 1. This way, if you have a program that's optimized for 2 cores and you only have 1 core in your computer, you can sort of trick the system into being optimized for that and get more performance out of your computer. So if you have a 16-core processor with hyper-threading, you can simulate having 32 cores in your computer if there's a program that's specifically running for that. With clock speeds, every processor will ship with a base clock. This is if you plug your CPU into the motherboard and just start using your computer, it'll run at this speed. It's usually very low speed, which will take low power, and the temperatures will stay very low. But then if you start running programs that start using up too much processing power, it'll usually boost up to a higher clock speed. The problem with this is the temperatures will increase, and that'll make it harder to cool the card. If the processor gets too hot, in order to prevent itself from self-destructing, it will automatically throttle back its speeds to be lower so that it doesn't have to keep running at a high temperature. This is kind of just like you running on the track, or a cheetah like running after a gazelle. He literally can't keep sprinting because his brain will overheat and he'll die. The processor literally can't keep running at crazy high speeds, otherwise it'll die, but what it does is just ramps back down and it stops running. There's a term called overclocking, which is only possible if your processor is unlocked. This is something where the manufacturer will decide if they ship it unlocked or locked. And that means if it's unlocked, you can go into your computer's BIOS and enter any value you want and tell your processor to run at that speed. If you open your BIOS and you tell it run at 7 gigahertz, it'll probably won't even boot into Windows because they can't handle that speed. It'll instantly overheat and just go flat. The kind of the holy grail of processing speeds has been at 5 gigahertz for the past 10 years, and this introduces us to the idea of Moore's Law. Has any of you heard Moore's Law before? Maybe. It's a pretty popular term nowadays because a lot of people are saying we've reached the end of Moore's Law. Moore's Law here, the observation that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit doubles about every 2 years. What this is basically saying is processors will get smaller, faster, and lower powered like every couple of years, and that means your computers will keep getting faster. But the problem is they're having trouble getting past this 5 gigahertz barrier. All they're doing is adding more and more cores now to try to compensate for that. So an interesting topic would be that quantum computing and artificial intelligence is kind of how we're going to continue breaking that barrier of getting faster processors by more optimizing them rather than actually getting smaller and faster. Because now they're working at these atomic levels where any more and they're going to start losing memory between electrons jumping walls that they aren't supposed to. We'll see. Here's another marketing scheme that they use when they're trying to sell you stuff. They talk about the manufacturing process, and they'll throw out words like 14 nanometer, 10 nanometer, 7 nanometer. And these used to correspond to like transistor densities on the actual chips, but as they got so small, they wanted to keep lowering that number, and so they could keep marketing it. But it no longer is a direct correlation between what the densities actually are. Densities are getting smaller, but not at this rate. They're just using this as a marketing term. They're just calling it a 7 nanometer process. And so we talked about how the processor has a cache in it, sort of its own RAM, and it actually has maybe, for most desktop processors, they'll have up to like 3 sets of RAM. They go from the RAM to inside the CPU a smaller level 3 cache, a level 2 cache, and a level 1 cache. It gets smaller and smaller as it gets closer and closer to the compute unit. The other thing when you're shopping for CPUs, you want to look at how many PCI lanes it can support. A PCIe lane is like we talked about, that solid state drive that's running the NVMe standard. You can have a direct access to the CPU. The CPU can support a certain amount of lanes of that. So if you don't have enough lanes to support enough of the solid state drives, then not all of them will be on PCIe and get the full bandwidth that they're advertised for. The other thing with CPUs is they have different socket types. There's PGA, which means pin grid array, LGA, which means land grid array, and then there's soldered CPUs. PGA means if you take the chip and you flip it upside down, you're going to see a whole bunch of pins on the bottom that you can drop into a motherboard. And the motherboard will have a bunch of contacts that each pin will touch onto. A land grid array processor will have all the contacts on the bottom of the processing chip, so sort of like just metal plates, and your motherboard will have all these pins sticking up that it can rest on top of. This way it can interface with your motherboard. You have to be careful what kind of socket your motherboard and CPU has, because if you shove a CPU into a motherboard that's not compatible with, your computer doesn't work. There's also soldered sockets, or usually in laptops, since you're not going to be removing your processor ever or installing it yourself, they'll solder it right on, which means they sort of melt metal contacts between the motherboard and the CPU. When we talked about overclocking, that introduces a lot of heat, and when it's turboing up to higher clock speeds, you're getting more heat. And when you buy a processor, it'll ship with a stock cooler, something with a fan and a metal heatsink that you can throw on top of it. But if you want more cooling, there's a lot of aftermarket cooling options. So there's some that are just passive cooling, where it'll just conduct and then radiate heat out of it. They have those with fans on it to blow air through it. They have all-in-one water cooling solutions. And then they also have full computer water cooling, where every component of the computer is connected to this water reservoir that will radiate heat through the water conduction. There's manufacturers for the processors, as we talked about. There's Intel and AMD are the big ones for x86 based systems. x86 is an instruction set architecture, so like how the physical processor is laid out, based on this Intel 8086 microprocessor that was released in 1978. We're still using that because in 1978 they made that processor. People liked it, it was very useful, they wrote programs for it. And then every year they didn't want to write programs in a different way, so all the way up till 2019, we're still running on x86, this architecture that was designed back in 1978. People know it is not the most efficient thing, but because all these programs that you're running Fortnite, Microsoft Word, Adobe Photoshop, Steam, all sorts of things, they're all written to be run on Windows and Mac, which are relying on this x86 architecture. The converse to x86, the one that's becoming very popular, is ARM processors, which you usually find on your phone. These have a newer standard, which is much more efficient processing, but the desktop programs and operating systems haven't been written for it, so most of your desktops will still be on x86. We can look at CPUs in the marketplace. Here's one made by Intel. Here's its product name, i5-9600K. For the Intel lineups, whenever you see a K, I believe it usually means it's unlocked. Oh yeah, it says on the box too, unlocked, which means that you can overclock this as much as you'd like to, as long as your thermals stay within a reasonable place where they can keep running. This one has 6 cores, so maybe not the most bang for your buck for your day-to-day activities, but maybe if you're streaming or you're doing lots of picture editing, some programs are optimized through 6 cores. This one's running at 4.6 gigahertz when it's turboed to higher frequencies. And the base is 3.7 gigahertz and it can boost up to 4.6. And we can see the cache size here is 9 megabytes. Okay, so to the graphics card, there's the dedicated graphics card, which is the one that's not inside your CPU, and the integrated graphics card, which is inside the CPU. The dedicated graphics card has its own chip and its own RAM and its own power delivery, compared to the one inside the CPU, which has to share resources with your CPU. So the dedicated graphics card will almost always be faster, and it has memory standards just like your CPU. We had DDR3 and 4. Here there's GDDR5 and 6. GDDR6 just came out, I think like at the beginning of this year, so most graphics cards you're buying now will not be on that standard, but GDDR5 has been what's been going on for the past couple of years. These are marketed in the size of their memory and the clock speed of the processor. I already talked about the difference between graphics card and motherboard plugins, so you have to make sure if you have a GPU in your computer, you want to be plugged into the one that's outputted by your GPU so that you can actually take advantage of that processing. The parallel compute structure makes it great for these multi-process parallel algorithms that can be used to mine cryptocurrency. And the manufacturers we see here are NVIDIA and AMD. Those are the 2 big ones for desktops. And then they make the chips, and they'll sell them to card manufacturers that will make the actual card to go into your computer, such as Asus, Gigabyte, MSI. Okay, here we see a graphics card. The card is made by EVGA, but then if we see here, there's you see this NVIDIA logo on it for the chip manufacturers made by NVIDIA, and then EVGA is packaging it to be sold as a card that you can put into your computer. The RAM size is 4 gigabytes, GDDR5 standard. don't see the, here it is. It also has a base clock speed and a boost clock speed. Let's see, 1354 and 1468. Okay, last two. We're almost there. The motherboard. The main thing you have to know about is the form factor that comes in. The form factor is just like the size that it takes up in the computer. There's many different sizes, from extended ATX, ATX, micro ATX, mini ATX, and there's also mini ITX, which is an even smaller form factor. And there's also custom motherboards like you saw inside the iPhone. That's definitely not a motherboard that you're buying for your desktop PC. They make their own. And then you also see some laptop manufacturers will make their own motherboards too. When you're buying this, the big thing about motherboards is compatibility. They're connecting everything together, so you have to make sure everything can plug into it. You need to have the right socket for the CPU. The RAM needs to be of the right generation so that you can actually plug it in. The PCIe lanes needs to support the graphics cards you're plugging in. Whether you want USB ports for your computer, whether you need SATA to run your hard drives, or if you're going to use the NVMe form factor. There's a lot of things you have to take into consideration. Here are some manufacturers that are ASRock, Asus, Gigabyte, and then MSI. Here's a motherboard made by MSI. It supports Intel LGA is land grid array 1151. That's how many pins it can support on the CPU that would plug into it. And then here we can see on it, it has RAM slots on the side, and then there's a PCIe lane where you could plug in a hard drive, plug in a graphics card. And then the last one is the power supply unit. This comes in mainly two form factors, the ATX and the SFX. SFX is small form factor. And there's also modular and non-modular power supplies. This just means whether you can plug stuff into and out of it. A non-modular like phone charger would be one that literally always has your phone plugged into it. You can't unplug and plug it in. Just like you would in your normal power bank, you have a port for your USB. A non-modular power supply is just a box with cables going to all your components that you never have to plug into and out of a power supply. With a power supply, this is the place where you can damage all your other components because it's running electricity through them. So when you're buying a computer, this is one place where you do not want to skip out on buying a very quality power supply. There's an organization that will give out an 80 plus certification. It just talks about the efficiency of the power supply. While it doesn't say anything about the quality, usually if it's recognized by 80 plus, that means it's made by a reputable brand. And so that has an indication that it's high quality. Some manufacturers you see are Corsair, EVGA, Be Quiet, and there's Silverstone. So here, EVGA again, they made the graphics card we looked at earlier, and here they're making a power supply. They have 80 plus gold certification, which is a good indication. It's high efficiency. And then this one supports a 750, up to 750 watts. So you can, if your computer of your CPU, graphics card, and RAM only uses 300 watts, it's okay because this one will support all the way up to 750. It's semi-modular, so it means some stuff can be plugged in and some stuff can't. As we can see here, we can plug some stuff in, so like the CPU, and then SATA and VGA. And then some of them are just a wire that never gets unplugged. They go straight to components. Okay, so here's your extra credit assignment for today. I want all of you to split into groups. And what you're going to do is find a computer, either find the parts and assemble a list of them, giving me the URLs of where you can buy them. Or you can just find a fully built computer, whether it's a laptop or a desktop, and send it to me. There's two ways you can get extra credit. Either the group that has the best computer for under $150, $1,500, and I'll be the judge of that. if we were in a perfect world, we'd buy all the different computers and run speed tests on all of them. But I don't think any of you are going to fund that. And then the other way you can get extra credit is give me the most detailed account of what's inside your computer. I don't care how much it costs. So this way you tell me how many cores the CPU has, what clock speed it's running at, tell me what generation of RAM you have, how many gigabytes, what clock speed that's running at. So the group with the most detailed account of what's inside their computer, and then the group that has the best computer for under $1,500. I want your subject line to say Digital World PM, so I can actually make sure you're in this class, so that way I can tell the professor who actually got extra credit and not mix you up between the two classes. And then inside the email, I need the group member names, at least the ones that want credit. The computer part links that you're getting me, and then the account of what's inside your computer if you're trying to go for this other opportunity. Send it to me by midnight. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to work on it right now so you guys can form groups and start working. Monitor, operating system, this stuff, it's not required. If it comes with like a laptop you're showing me in the email, that's perfectly fine, but it doesn't give you extra bonus points for having the best computer.
Can I ask questions?
Sure, you can ask questions.
So I have some questions. By the way, anybody can ask him questions. So I have a question. So Leo, why are we going through this trouble? What's the pros and cons versus buying a computer that already has everything in it and going through the trouble of assembling a computer on my own?
Okay, so when you buy a computer that has everything in it, like the MacBook Pro or someone else's laptop, somebody's job was to go and select all the components and put it together into a nice package and sell it to you. That person needs to get paid, so the price that he's going to get paid for comes up in your computer price. So you have to pay a small premium for people to make computers for you. Otherwise, you can make them yourself and maybe get more performance out of less money. A company that is famous for having a very full package is Apple. From talking to the mining manufacturers of the materials to their people who are making processors and the motherboards, and then all the way to your computer and then support afterwards. They have it all in one package, but you pay a much larger premium to have everybody working for you. So this way you can have a computer that's much cheaper and gets you much more power than you might from an Apple product.
Have you ever built a computer?
I've built 2 computers. None of them for myself though, because I wasn't willing to fund that, but one for a neighbor down the street and one for a company.
So I've heard that there's a couple of options for having external components, how you can do an external hard drive, and also I've heard about external GPUs for graphics. But is there a way that you can do that for a CPU to add more processing power to your computer?
There's ways to have multiple CPUs on your computer, but that would be motherboard reliant. I haven't heard of any ways where you can have an external one that plugs in using a USB interface or anything like that.
Okay.
Actually, there's one other way to get more processing power. That's using a server, or where I'm sure maybe you guys use the tunneling service where you can log into a computer based somewhere else, maybe on an Amazon web server. There you can sort of get more processing power, as much that can fit into your bandwidth of internet and getting stuff back. That way you can easily scale computers without needing to buy the physical hardware. I use this one. I think I bought maybe 4 years ago, maybe a little less than that. But it doesn't have a dedicated GPU in it, so I use the one that's built into the CPU. And I don't play Fortnite or something that requires high graphics intensity, so it does fine for me. Sure.
So I understand that it's important to know how many cores a computer has and what software, how many cores it's written for. How do I find that information? When I go to Photoshop, does it actually tell me it's optimized for 4-core or 6-core?
Finding core counts is usually harder, but let's say you want to play the game Fortnite. You can search your program, minimum specs, and then usually there will be a place either from the actual software makers or from other communities that make these lists. You can see what minimum requirements are for your system. So we can say, for this one, they want you to have a Core i3 processor, which if you look up, most of them are dual core with 2.4 gigahertz minimum clock speed. They want you to have at least 4 gigabytes of RAM. And the video card, Intel HD 4000, is actually the built-in video card into the Intel CPUs. But you have to keep in mind this is minimum requirements. If you want to like have all these beautiful grass effects and every single frame loading at like 60 or 100 per second, then you have to go a lot higher. So you can see a lot of people will list minimum requirements and then recommended requirements. Here you'll have a Core i5, which tend to be quad-core processors at a slightly higher clock speed, double the amount of RAM, and then here they're listing dedicated video cards with their own video memory. That's a lot of questions, yes?
Yeah, so if I just want to bring up the clock speed without having to pay more, let's say you have an existing computer, and I just want to up the clock speed and maybe so replace the cooler. So how do I change the clock speed?
Okay, so first,
What
we
can
talked about here in overclocking, whether your CPU is unlocked or locked. Almost all laptop CPUs are locked because they don't want you messing with it, because the cooling solution made for your laptop was made specifically for the clock speed that it's going to be running at. If you do have a desktop at home, you could look into your processor model, see if it's an unlocked one. You can search on Amazon or on Google. Usually Intel will have an information page for your processor. And then if that's the case and it is unlocked, then one, you should go watch YouTube on tutorials on how to do that because you don't want to break the components. And then you'll have to access what's called the BIOS, the basic input-output system, I think. Something like that. And then in there you can just enter whatever number you want. It'll run at that speed or break. Okay, if that's all the questions, I'll put on a timer for 10 minutes. You guys can get started working on the thing. Either send me an email within this this class period, or send it later tonight, and I'll tell the professor who gets extra credit. Sure. You can submit your own individually. He really wants to hog all the extra credit for himself.
Trying to get you there.